All right, let's get going. For those of you who are new, one here, I'm Marius Foley. I'm the program manager of the program, Master of Design Futures, and I'll be working with Leah Heiss. Leah's here, and we'll give you a bit of an introduction shortly. Just by way of introduction to myself, I've been running the program for about 3.5 years. It started with a colleague, Jeremy Yule, who designed and developed a lot of the course structure. But since then, and because of the nature of the program, it changes consistently, not in jumpstart ways, but in a evolutionary way, as you would imagine with human-centered design courses. It really does need to respond to what's going on at the moment, because this is an emergent field and it's changing quite rapidly. So what we aim to do is keep abreast of all of those changes, really understand what's going on, but also to dig deeply into what's happening within the human-centered design space. So for most of you, I think this will be the first studio course that you've undertaken, and it has a number of features which I'll run through. But most importantly is it's longer than things like service design or design strategy. It goes deeper, and the aim is to really fully explore what it is we're doing in the human-centered design space. So Leah will talk to that in a minute. Some housekeeping. First is, of course, I'm recording this, and this was a constant thing. So if you're not able to make it, of course, you have that ability to come back in. In this course, though, I'd really encourage you to make every effort to come in on the Zoom sessions. There's some sort of quality to them, I think, that is hard to find with just the simple asynchronous interaction. So wherever possible, drop in. If it's not possible, throw in some questions on Slack prior to the session, so we'll get a chance to consider those and may be able to answer them during the session. And then after this session, come back in and do a review of what's been discussed and who's been involved, etc. Some just general housekeeping, and most of you will know this. In the Zoom session, it's important to have a protocol where you turn off your mic if you're not speaking. And the reason for that is just so you don't interrupt the recording with background ambient noise. You can also text any questions or links. If you go down to the bottom of your screen, you should find a chat button, and that opens up the chat on the side up to the right. And while Leah is doing her thing, I'll be looking at the chat and responding where I can. It's useful to refer back to the guidelines that I put up in the channel last week, where I asked everyone to build a sense of community around the sort of structures we work with. And a really important one of those is that all conversations should be respectful. We don't mind robust conversations. We're quite interested in debate, but everything has to be respectful, and it's worthwhile pushing yourself a little bit further than what you might think is respectful beyond the argy-bargy of your normal chats with friends and family, etc. That will be something that we keep referring to. And just before moving on to more detailed stuff, just like to wish you all a happy Women's Day for Friday, coming up soon. When I was talking about the studio course, one of the things that we're doing here, which will be different from what you've experienced in service design or design strategy, or even context, is that we have a system of publishing packages, the lecture material, learning material, etc. In those other courses, we do that week by week. In this course, we're doing it in a front-loaded way, where we'll actually publish the substance of the segment, the module, before you go into that. So you'll get 3, maybe 4 packages over this course, whereas in the others you would have been getting a weekly one. So that's important to know, because you will also know that those packages, those ideas and concepts will take a bit of time to process and require a bit of attention to them. So they need to be seen differently to the ones where you're doing them on the go. There were a number of people who had difficulties today and over the last couple of days finding the readings. So what we'll do from this point on is just put the readings up on Canvas. Canvas is a university learning management system. It's something that we use for assessment and for as a repository for the material. Things like this recording will go up on Canvas. The packages will go up on Canvas. So while they might appear, and the readings will go up on Canvas, while they might appear in Slack, you've got this other channel where you can go back to and find that according to the schedule, as you've seen on the Canvas website. If any of you are not in Canvas, then we'll deal with that over the next week. Equally, I think it's useful to understand that in this studio course, we'll be doing a different style of session, Zoom session. The first thing is that there'll be a mix of presentations. Tonight will be largely a presentation of the material, a briefing, an overview, not a lot of time to talk and interact. If there is time, we'll certainly do that, but this is a setup type of session. We will then, at various points, go into tutorial or seminar sessions. So we'll all come together at the same time. But then in tutorial groups, we'll break off into breakout rooms. So that leaves you time to actually talk more deeply about the issues, questions, and ideas that you've got. We will also be looking at bringing in a number of guest speakers. And so they'll be more like a conventional lecture, though our experience is that most of them want to interact with you as well, so there'll be time for that. The other side of the tube group or the seminar group is that with something like 22, 23 people in the course, it's important to track a tube group. So when Leah and I are assessing, we have a closer idea of what you're doing. So we will break the tutes into 2, or the group into 2 tutes. Leah will assess group 1, I'll assess group 2. We'll run that through the semester so that tute 1 will be seeing Leah and tute 2 will be seeing me. However, we'll probably interact or jump across at various times.
Can everyone hear me? Can you just wave? Yeah, thumbs up, that's good. I'm working from home and sometimes the internet goes funny. So if you can't hear me, just wave. Is that okay? Everyone got that? All right. Yeah, cool. So thank you very much, Marius. My name is Leah Heiss and I'm a designer and an RMIT researcher. This is the second time that I've taught future design clients. It is always an industry partnered healthcare oriented project because that's very close to my practice. Last year we worked with Matu Bush from Bolton Clark and we looked at end of life experience and how we could understand from a human centered perspective the experience of people and families that were going through that journey. And this semester we have an interesting opportunity to work with what's called the Primary Healthcare Network. And so this is an organisation that is responsible for 1.7 million people in the north of Melbourne. One of their priority populations are families and children. And so we've been doing a whole lot of work to understand the experiences of disadvantaged families in before, during and after pregnancy. So it's given us a really interesting sort of framework to think about what might be useful for future design clients. Before I launch into that and the will of packages, but I thought it might be useful just to give you an overview of my practice now. So one thing you'll notice around me is that I'm a very tactile person, and I'm definitely not a minimalist. So yeah, I was trying to find the tidiest looking part of my office, but I didn't do a very good job. Now, I just wanted to introduce you briefly to my practice and the way that I go about things. And so I'm going to share the screen now and let me know. I just wanted to give you a really quick background to my practice. Traverses human-centered design for wearable health technologies, but also service and experience. So for about the last 10 years, I've been focusing on design interventions to improve or save life. A lot of these, I'll take you through my wearable works to start with and then move more into the service side of things. So I work a lot with expert teams from across nanotechnology, microelectronics, engineering, through cancer. So it's a very, very collaborative practice. And it is a material practice. So I think what can be really interesting when people come into this course is that they might come with a very sort of two-dimensional aspect and way of working. And I guess what I can bring into the conversation sometimes is something about this kind of three-dimensionality, just different ways of mapping and working through ideas and breaking down complex ideas into their constituent parts. So some of my work over the last decade or so developed jewelry to administer insulin through the skin for diabetes. So using these, so working with nanotechnologists and these nano-engineered patches, vessels and devices to remove arsenic from drinking water using nano-engineered mesoporous iron oxide. So each of these projects is a translation project, and it's like we have some serious technology on the bench somewhere and we need to find a human-centered solution for it to connect with a market or with a user group. And as a side to all of these projects, or as integral to the design process for all of these, is a lot of user engagement. So I've had to develop a whole series of methodologies and ways of understanding the emotional experience of people, particularly in the healthcare sector. I worked on swallowable devices to detect disease in the gut, and particularly a lot with people who have hearing issues. And so a number of years ago, about 5 years ago, I worked with quite a disruptive Melbourne-based hearing aid company to design a technology to enable people to modify the experience of their hearing aid. Most recently, I've been working with Marty Bush from Bolton Clark, and we're working on a wearable to detect loneliness for people who live in the living alone community. And that's a really interesting one because it's looking at huge data sets around loneliness in the community. Bolton Clark, it's one of their priority situations that there is. How are people coping at home? We don't know how much people in older communities who live alone are communicating, and what they're interested in is whether we can build a data set of knowledge that is around the amount of communication that's occurring. So what this is, and it's kind of, I'll send you a link to it was on Channel 7 News last week, even though it's still in prototype, but it's a little lapel badge that counts the number of words that you speak per minute and correlates this against an average for healthy interaction rates. But the thing that we're interested in is whether you can personalize technologies so that they integrate well into the lifestyles of people. So we're working in a sort of co-design manner with people to design technologies that look like other things. So they might look like brooches, or they might look like medals that we got in the Vietnam War, or they might look like our Lions badge. But they're just a little technology. They use mobile phone technology, so they can be used as falls monitors, but also have this other capability. So that's a new project. A couple of years ago, I started designing a new hearing aid. So it's got one here, the world's first modular self-fit hearing aid. And in order to do this, I worked on this. I was embedded for 37 weeks in a hearing aid company. In order to do it, I had to spend a lot of time with people and try and understand the emotional experience of hearing loss and the impact that it had on people in the working environment and at home. The key thing about this one is that it enables people with, I'll go back, it enables people with tactile insensitivity and vision impairment to change their own batteries. And what's so important about that is that currently hearing aids, the batteries are incredibly hard to change. And if you lose them, they're very dangerous to young children and pets. So this is a technology, is a really, really simple magnetic connector. But I think the design process for it was most important to me, which was really spending a lot of time with people. I spent a lot of time in aged care, but also a lot of time with people, understanding the stories of hearing loss and thinking about ways to creatively use that information in the design process. I'm just going to flip forward. Over the years, I've been working a lot with different hospitals. So I work with Peter Mac and Olivia Newton-John Cancer and Wellness Centre. And this is an interesting piece that I did a couple of years ago with a team here at RMIT, which was looking at whether we could design a cardiac Holter monitor to replace the fairly ugly, clunky thing that you see in the top right of the screen. And so this was called the Smart Heart, and it was with St V's, working with sort of the cardiologist there and trying to come up with human-centred approaches to the issue of heart monitoring. And questioning too, sort of throwing open that question around, do we have a technology for 24 to 48 hours? Or can we start to think about longer wear interventions? And so this was a device that was developed to be worn for 10 to 14 days and recharged at night time. So onto the tactile tools. As part of my PhD research, I was doing lots and lots of iterative prototyping. So everything that I do has many, many, many prototypes. And I was working with these large interdisciplinary teams working on healthcare, particularly healthcare devices. And I was thinking about how we could develop this kind of prototyping solution, but for complex problems, particularly in the healthcare industry. And so there's what I call the tactile tools, which is a design thinking service mapping methodology. It brings together complex groups of people, working groups from sectors, and we use it to break down large scale problems into manageable solutions. And Marius and I have been working on this for a while now. So I started in the PhD and then I brought it into our practice. And we've used it with about 150 people so far. So I'll give you a couple of shots here. The process is really, personas. We're all familiar with personas. We have a problem, and the problem, for instance, was last year Victorian Healthcare Association contacted us and said, we need to implement voluntary assisted dying next year. And the legislation's gone through, but we don't have any process for doing it. We don't know how we're going to do it. We don't know what all the obstacles will be and the roadblocks to implementation, what they will be. And so we said to them, well, we can run this workshop, and what this does is that it gets people to empathise with the person at the centre of this process. So no longer just a name on a spreadsheet, but someone who's actually having a lived experience of navigating the healthcare system. And it's really good at coalescing working groups. And so we use this with to understand the roadblocks to implementing voluntary assisted dying last year, using personas. I'll see if and these are personas from a recent engagement. So what it's really about is defining, defining a goal. So a group come together and you have groups of 4, and they might be an oncologist, a patient representative, a nurse unit manager. So a whole lot of diverse groups come together in groups of 4, and they work with a persona, and they understand the experience of that person. The personas are developed with expert groups, and then they map out that person's experience. So the orange rectangles are goals that the person is working towards. The yellow hexagons are roadblocks. So what are the roadblocks to me accessing voluntary assisted dying if I happen to live in Victoria in a country town? They're things like access to the right oncologist who will be able to so there's a whole lot of things, access to telehealth, etc. So the yellow hexagons are roadblocks. And then the teams need to work on finding solutions. So we've got purple circle workarounds. Green, what you can see on the screen now are little green donuts, and they're stakeholder tools. And the blue tools are empathy tools. And what these do is that they encourage, particularly healthcare workers, to zoom back out of being a healthcare worker who was looking for a solution to a problem, and to identify with the human experience of the person in the centre. So in this case, we were using these personas here. There's a couple of personas that you've probably seen already online. So this is Katie. She's 7 months pregnant, and she has an 18-month-old son. She's living in a caravan park with a partner, Mike. So this was a persona that we developed with a PHN over the last month or so, and it's based on real stories. And so we got a group of people together, and I'll come back to this sort of picture here, to map out Katie's experience. So, which is a good segue to talking about the projects. So you see a picture here on the screen of Rachel's persona. So there's 4 different personas that you have. Has everyone seen those yet? No, they haven't seen them. Okay, so we're going to share these personas with you. We've developed these personas in conjunction with PHN, so Primary Healthcare Network, Northwestern Melbourne. The personas are of women who are living in the western suburbs of Melbourne and who are at risk or who have delivered low birth babies. And what PHN have identified is that low birth weight is an indicator of a whole series of adverse outcomes for individuals. And they were interested in understanding the experience of each of these people, or they're really customer groups. And so using the tactile tools methodology, we brought a group of 30 frontline healthcare workers together 3 weeks ago now. And we got them to use the tactile tools to map out each of these people's experiences. And I'll just show you a couple of shots. Okay, sorry, it's gone a bit slow. It's just going a little bit slowly. So we've got, it likes going forward, but not backwards. All right, okay. So I'm just flicking around here. So I'll find some shots for you. Yeah. And once we mapped out these experiences, we started to develop diagrams to draw out what we could understand then as being the obstacles and the workarounds to issues. And this is a diagram. This is an indicative diagram. This is one for voluntary assisted dying. So it just is kind of a process map that helps us to understand what are each of the obstacles to implementing. In this case, it was voluntary assisted dying. But in the PHN situation, it was what are the obstacles to, say, Katie having a healthy birth weight baby, or for one of the other personas, to having thriving baby or a thriving family, or doing well. They were challenged to come up with a goal that was meaningful to that persona. Okay, I'm just going to flick through. These are just a couple of shots of the way that we've used it in the past. So we use the methodology with Olivia Newton-John Cancer Centre to bring together oncologists, nurse unit managers and patient representatives to understand the roadblocks to delivering good cancer care. And we've used it with engineers, with Oricon Engineering, to understand, again, the obstacles and challenges to having a human-centred view when dealing with communities in transition. Okay, and this shot here of biology to understand the roadblocks to implementing voluntary-assisted dying. So now I'm going to share this one. Okay, so this is the information. We can go through it. Can you see the Tactile Tools Primary Healthcare Network, Northwestern Melbourne? Yeah, great. Okay, so bringing you up to speed on the collaboration. We ran a Tactile Tools workshop with 32 frontline healthcare workers 3 weeks ago. We positioned this as part of a 7-stage process. And it's basically the first 3 stages were about delivering a workshop, understanding what the problem space was, and then framing up a number of challenges that you could get involved in. Now, we're not farming you out as a Brains Trust, just want you to know that. But what we could see is the potential of engaging with real world problems, you know, and given the ensuring, of course, that the IP scenario is adequate, which we're really thinking about quite deeply. Your IP is incredibly important to you as practitioners, but we thought it was something if we can engage with a real world problem of some kind. And what that means is that we've got all of these partners and there's lots of data that we can draw from. And so this was a really interesting space to work with. And so we're sort of where the arrow is. We're a bit past there now. So we're basically in this second stage here, which is about, is there something in this problem space about trying to deliver healthy birth weight babies, or just trying to encourage positive family relationships in areas that are disadvantaged, that is interesting to look at from a human-centered design perspective. And so we really think it is. Okay. So report back to PHN last week and today. We're just going to give you a summary of where we got to, and this will give you a bit of a sense of the problem space. So the experience of coming to the table, and this is a methodology that I've developed that we use, but you'll have your own methodologies, enable the participants to engage with peers from different perspectives and coalesce this working group of people. They're all working with this, what it's called the Better Health for the West plan, which is improving health outcomes. It enabled them to see the value of thinking through the experience of a persona, and some people had encountered personas. We've all encountered personas. Every bank in the world has personas now, but actually using the persona as a human-centered design technique and methodology and working through the experience of the person in the persona was very powerful, and it helped them to build capacity in their workforce. Engaging with the experience of a person at the centre of the service landscape was very helpful. And that shift in perspective to Katie's perspective, what's Katie feeling and thinking right now, as opposed to, I'm a psychologist and I'm trying to help Katie, what can I do to help her? So really getting into the shoes of the person at the centre of the landscape. And what we found came out is that there were a whole lot of roadblocks to the personas achieving positive outcomes. And you'll start to see these when you look at the personas. So there were things like discrimination, lack of family, friends and support networks. And I know that we have people from other countries here, but I think that there will be a lot of similarities. You'll be able to identify, I think, with the roadblocks and the kinds of issues that people are facing in these marginalised communities. Finances, food security, cost of living, transport. And we're sort of pulling out the themes of the types of things when you empathise with people who were in these situations. They were very concerned and alone and isolated, and how do I get there? And there was lots of shame and stigma and embarrassment about their way of living. And there's great sense of I don't know where to begin, because healthcare is a big knotty space and it's really hard for people to understand You know, where do I start and who do I talk to and who are my champions in this space? And these were the types of stakeholders that we pulled out of it. It's like lots and lots of stakeholders. And this is just a really rough overview, okay? So then we're going to move into the actual project. And you'll see these sorts of things coming up again and again whenever you engage with big health issues, that there's a whole lot of lack of coordination and service provision and prioritising, mental health issues, you know, people falling out of the system earlier. Family support networks, and yeah, this sort of idea that if you're very marginalised, the extent to which the challenges of surviving get in the way of caring for your health. So I'll just flip through this. But so moving forward, there's a really interesting set of data that PHN have, and we'll share that with you. And I think as a partner organisation, it's quite interesting because they spent a lot of time, probably the first couple of years, gathering data on all of their priority populations. And just even having access to that data is quite interesting. The way that they visualise, you know, advantage and disadvantage in their priority spaces. So you can see even in that depiction there. So the area that we're working with has very, very high income and very, very low income and everything in between. Okay, all right. So I'm now going to go to the project. Okay. Yeah, project. Give me 30 seconds. Oh, you're seeing everything on my screen. Okay, hang on. There we go. I think I'll just come back to not sharing.
Might be up at the top, Leah, in the green, is it?
Yeah, I'm just going to bring it up on the, just give me one sec. Okay, museum share. Okay, so you should see my, can you see this? Introduction to Future Design Clients. Yeah. Okay. This is what you don't want to see, is all my bookmarks. Okay, I'll just bring it. Okay, Marius. All right. So Marius, can you talk through this? I'll stop sharing and I'll just get up the first project.
Sure. Give me a minute. Okay, so the overview is on package 1. And really the key things are that we're working in a partnership arrangement with PHN. We've dropping down into this area of what they call low birth weight as a indicator of a whole range of other things. We're looking for ways to bring HCD, human-centered design, into an exploration of this space. And so stage 1 is discovery. Stage 2 is to move you into generating some material that will help you to understand the landscape and the people involved. And then from that, what we hope to do is to consider some solutions or ideas that might generate solutions for a holistic approach to this. So we're trying to challenge the current system, and we're looking at simple, inexpensive, creative, innovative ways to manage some of the things that are going through this population group. So you will be looking at generating ideas. I think what we're imagining is that those ideas will evolve out of the first module, and Leah will go through that in detail. But the module is really to locate you in that space. So again, as I was saying before, rather than rushing through to the end, if you pace yourself through as we've set this up, you'll find that there's a lot of stuff that comes through that'll be really useful for you. We made the point here too that, and we know this to be the case because we feel it as well, these are quite difficult areas to deal with. They do bring you into contact with people in extreme disadvantage. Not personally, we don't want you to go and talk to anyone who's in that situation or research them, but they do bring those stories up. So I guess the sort of safeguard that we set up here is to ask you to alert us if there's anything that you find too confronting, and we'll work with you to work through that or work around that. You wanting to go, Leah?
Sure, yes. Okay, so everyone should have access to the personas. Marius has sent you a link to that. So basically, module 1, and you will have received, this has been posted, package 2. Module 1 is titled Understanding the Client. Throughout the module, you'll focus on empathetically engaging with the experience of a child and family in the first 1,000 days from conception through 2 years old. So we're providing you with those personas as a way to understand one set of experiences. As we mentioned, the personas have been developed with healthcare workers and are based on real human stories, but there's always going to be gaps. And I think that's the thing, is feeling comfortable to make a few jumps, and if you get really stuck, to send an email to a colleague or to get onto the Slack channel and to say, I'm wondering about this. But we're always encouraging you to extrapolate from information that you have. So I'm not going to read all that to you because I think you can do it. But the idea of future design clients is to structure and orient the research to your local community. So what we'd like you to do for the first part, which is M1, is to choose from one of the 4 personas that are provided to you, and choose the one that you feel resonates, not necessarily from a personal perspective, but I'd probably look at those personas. I live in North Melbourne, and I'd see that there were certain stories that I can see in my own community or in a community that might be adjacent to my community. Living in the Middle East, you probably don't have many Indigenous Aboriginal people there. So, obviously that particular persona might not be as relevant to your situation. So you need to choose from one of the 4 personas that are provided to you. They're designed to help you empathise with a family who are struggling. And what we'd like you to think about is, how would someone like this live in your city or town? And what would their support structures be like? Where would they live? What third places would be important to them? And I'll put up a reading about third places. So third places, the third place theory is really around that work or home is first place, work is second place, and what are the third places that we inhabit? And they can be places, there's a whole range of things that we think of to define third place, that they don't cost a lot of money, that you can meet other people there in unstructured scenarios. And they tend to encompass public meeting places like cultural centres, libraries, some cafes, community centres and spaces like that. Once you're feeling for the person and their circumstances, locate them in your city or town. And then we want you to define what the adjacent services, support structures and engagement points would be for that person if they were to live in your town. You're quite welcome to rename them, and to flesh out their persona in some way. So what we're giving you is a starting point. And then we'd like you to create a network map of significant spaces, places and services for your chosen zone. So I'd like you to think aesthetically about how you communicate different types of spaces and places, and what the hierarchies might be, particularly when we're dealing with someone and we're trying to innovate in this space too. So there's probably 10 ways that we would do this if we're on a job and we've given 15 minutes to create a mapping, or a stakeholder mapping of some kind, or a mapping of services. But this is an opportunity to be a little more exploratory and to think about different ways that you might represent information. So think about how you communicate different types of places and spaces, medical spaces, support services, recreational or third places, educational spaces, etc. There might be other spaces that are really important to your persona. The aim of the activity is to orient your research towards your own community and connects you to local care providers. So some things to consider. The easiest way to do this is to grab a Google map and to put some notations on it, yeah? But aesthetically, and from a communications perspective, it's a little bit limited. So is there a way to go beyond that kind of representation? So it's designed to summarize and condense the numerous operators into one page for quick reference. And the term network map, so this came back once before, and someone was saying, well, network mapping comes from this body of theory in 1971, and it's this, and I was like, no, it's not that. We're just using it loosely as a term. It means a visual representation of the service providers and their interconnections. It's not a specific drawing typology. Okay, so I just put this in because I think this is a really lovely way to very quickly think about, we don't always need to use Illustrator, we don't always need to use Google Maps. We can look around our house and find all sorts of interesting materials. So I don't say that you have to build from tubes, but I just want you to think a little more laterally. And this is a really lovely mapping that was created by one of our students last year. And it's for an emotional journey map, sort of further on. But I thought it was really quite lovely because there was something quite tactile about it. And there was something really nice about this, the mapping of meaning onto different types of lollies, actually. And it was the first step in her, so to start with, this student who was a branding specialist, started with really two-dimensional representations. And she just laid everything over the top of Google Maps, and that was fine. It was really effective. And then she started to explore and develop all sorts of things. And this methodology for using, she was quite inspired by the felt kits that she used as a kid. And it ended up inspiring this really wonderful kit, a toolkit of felt icons, and I'll show you some pictures a little later, that helped her to communicate with people about the experience and dying. And because it was, we like to think about how can you lower the barriers to access for people to communicate with you. And it was one of those toolkits that enabled anyone, or a child or a 7-year-old, to have a conversation using visual icons. So I think I'd like you to sort of get started on that this week and just see how you go. I know there's going to be a million questions. We need to create a bit of a culture of trust so that as you're working on things, you can put them up on Slack and get some feedback from your colleagues. And I'll have certain feedback times that I'll post. I just have to look at my diary and work out when they'll be. The second part of this project is to map for relationships, and that's more what you can see above here. And this exercise is about zooming in on the persona's experience and understanding the relationships that are pivotal to them and their family having positive health outcomes. So firstly, we're the person in your suburb or in your city or in your town or in the next suburb over and developing a feeling for them in that space. And it'll open your eyes to some of the things that are happening around you. And the second thing is really to understand the relation around them. That might help in achieving positive health outcomes. So once you've developed an understanding of these relationships, you need to depict them in a drawing or a diagram. This can take the form of a stakeholder mapping, an emotional journey map, diagram, etc. So I was thinking about some of the relationships and services. So the first one is really about places and spaces, and the second one is about relationships. Immediate family, extended family, residential, maternal and child health facilities, healthcare providers. And so we're going from this, it's almost sort of data to emotions quite quickly. So from a mapping perspective, it's almost like it's going from we're mapping adjacencies to services, and then we're thinking about what are the relationships with the people in those service provision outlets. So policymakers, allied health professionals, etc. Which of these stakeholders will exert the strongest impact on your persona's experience as they navigate the maternal and child health space? Who will provide the greatest support? And one, it's almost sort of like a bit of a key, is just to identify an aspect of the persona's experience that's most interesting to you as a practitioner. And I'm looking at you, and I haven't met you all yet, but I will meet you personally. We'll have personal conversations in the next few weeks. And you all have areas of expertise and areas that you'd like to grow in your practices. And I think that's the thing, is really to think about where you want to go with your practice and bear that in mind as you start to zoom in on areas. And so there might be people that are really interested in policy or in the role of religious organisations and allied health professionals and the kind of support that they can do. So that can be a nice way to provide some boundaries. So some of those things could be family relationships, crisis points, the development of birth plans, the system of service, maternal and child health. There could be lots of different things that, you know, that draw your interest. So you can use that focus as a way to limit the field of relationships. And so a couple of things to consider here is that a key part of the exercise is about challenging existing service design approaches and creatively communicating emotional experience. So that could be through modelling, filmmaking, sound recording, diagramming. Again, we come back to this idea of experimentation, and you're at university, this was me up. You're at university again for many, not just to get a piece of paper that says that you're a human-centred designer. And not to be churlish about that, because we have had people in the past that have undergo this quite radical change where they arrive at the front door saying, I really need a piece of paper because I'm a human-centred designer, but I can't prove it. And that's a really interesting process. So they're with us for a period of time, and then over time they realise, actually, this is an incredible opportunity to expand my practice and to try really, you know, some non-conventional approaches, to experiment a little more than I can in my daily working life. So we really want you to be creative, and we will support you at all times to push that creativity as far as you can. Is it possible to experiment with materials or techniques outside of your existing toolkit? So again, doesn't need to be lollies, but yeah, there's all sorts of interesting materials out there. The work will take some extrapolating and elimination, all of the information about the persona. So we need to think creatively about the relationships. So the thing that we found when we ran the workshop with the 32 frontline healthcare workers was that we had one table that said, just because there's not enough information, and we're encouraging them to really try and develop some solution conjectures. Because basically we'll never have all of the information, particularly when we're working in really tricky spaces. So do what you can, and there's always a bias to action in this course. And the bias to action is really about give it a go and come back and get some feedback. There's much easier feedback when we have something to show and something to share. And we'll always support you to give it a try. The third part of this project, and we've got 4 weeks for the project, by the way, so you don't need to be delving into this yet. It's a kind of a sequence thing. And is this idea of problem finding. And Nigel Cross, has anyone read Nigel Cross's work? He's got a lot of work in design thinking. Keys Dorst is at UTS and writes thinking. Nigel Cross, we've uploaded a reading from him, wrote Designerly Ways of Knowing, which is a great book. And I'll put up a few things from him. But he talks about this idea of solution conjecture, means of developing our understanding of a problem. So problems are very big, and you've all worked with big problems. I've looked at your introductions. You're working in big complex spaces. So we all work on big problems. The things we're doing at the moment, how do we improve maternal and child health? How do we improve end of life experience? How do we improve engineers? They're big problems. So they're big, knotty problems, and you can't answer them very simply. And so what we do as designers is that we come up with these solution conjectures, and we're always continually refining our understanding of the problem and the solution simultaneously. And we kind of shuffle them forward towards some sort of outcome. And the idea of kind of iterative design. We're iteratively designing our way towards the solution at the same time as we're moving towards a really defined understanding of the problem. Engineers work in a really different way. They want a really clearly articulate view of the problem before they start work. But we don't really do that as designers. We understand that problems have sort of fuzzy edges, and so we need to just get started. So that's kind of the way of working here. And just this quote is quite useful because its designers tend to use conjectures as the means of developing their understanding of the problem. Since the problem cannot be fully understood in isolation from consideration of the solution, it's natural that solution conjectures should be used as a means of helping to explore and understand problem formulation. They use early solution attempts as experiments to help identify relevant information about the problem. So for M1.3, we'd like you to create a 2-dimensional, 3-dimensional representation of the problem area using materials of your choice. Program Cross suggests that designers co-evolve the problem and solution during the early phases of design, and it's through the creation of solution conjectures that we're able to understand the problem space. This idea of building the problem can really help us to see new connections and things. So the work could be as a drawing, it could be a diagrammatic representation, or it could be a sculptural form crafted from materials. And we'll give you a couple of examples next week. I think we've seen a lot of things today. But I wanted to show you a very beautiful drawing that was done by Leah, who is a service designer at Red Cross, and she's also one in the cohort. And it was just a really nice way of understanding experience, whose name is Louisa, who was born in Italy and sailed to Melbourne with her husband, and it maps out the whole of her life. So it's not necessarily a mapping of the problem space, but it takes us on this really visual narrative through to where she is now. And Leander identified as kind of the problem space was that Louisa's world was shrinking, and that she had all of these wonderful memories and relationships, but they were being pruned around. Her world was getting smaller and smaller. And from that point there, Leander was able to propose methodologies and ways of getting more information about that and suggesting shifts in service delivery. So things to consider as you're developing your representation, consider how you depict parts of the system, such as stakeholders, policies, family resources, and resilience. So if we're doing a mapping of the problem space or building a sculpture of the problem space or whatever we're doing, we're going to need to represent these different things. So you're starting to think about how parts of the system are visualized. If you develop a 3-dimensional structure, ensure that you photograph it and diagram the work for feedback and submission. So that's really all the work for the first, until week 4. So there's a lot of time to do that. I think for the first, I'll stop sharing now. Okay. I think the main thing to do, before I hand back to Marius, is to just get across what they sent you, have a read of the briefs, understand that everything that we do is still evolving, and that sometimes you think, why have they done it that way? And the really great thing about things always evolving is that we're never running the same thing twice. So this is the first time this particular class has ever happened, and you are the unique batch of people that are going to do it. And we're going to come up with really innovative solutions, well, semi-solutions to extraordinarily complex problems. It's not like we developed this online module and we're just pumping it out to 7,000 people, per week. This is new work. So if you find in that you think, I wouldn't have phrased it that way, or I have a question, then as Marius says, that question can go via the back channel. You can come straight to us and we'll clarify things for you. But if you'd just like to talk more generally about the content, I think everyone will be on Slack. Get across all the material, have a bit about it, how might you do it, start to share some ideas, sketch out some ideas, and happy to give feedback later in the week. So I'm going to hand back to Marius now. Too much talking for me, and it's got dark. I just realized.
Thank you. Yeah, so just to give that a little bit more context, you've got your first module, which is diving into this space, really exploring it, being quite relaxed about that exploration, not trying to rush to the end, but looking for the richness that you might find, even in the tactile nature of the materials you might use. So don't let anything pass you by in that space. As a way of keeping a bit of an eye on the future, though, the next module leads you into developing ideas around an engagement, which could be a co-design engagement that you design, or a strategy that you formulate in order to do the sorts of things that we've been talking about in that preparatory work, breaking down the silos between all these different services, weaving the services together, humanising really this incredible amount of effort that goes on. And we'll talk to you about what the shape of that is. It's effectively as an assessment piece, it's a report on what you do, but that report should not only include the thing that you design in order to respond to this challenge, but also documentation of every stage, including the first part. And then the third part of this three-part trilogy of assessments is to seriously reflect on your own practice from what you've learned by exploring and experimenting in the way that Leah's been talking about. So a note there, I think, is to really start that reflective practice now in whatever way it's most comfortable for you. That could be a journal that you write in and sketch in and put pieces of found objects in, whatever that happens to be. Could be a blog, could be recording your own thoughts verbally or in audio. Could be having conversations with other people. Whatever that is, could be just sort of doing notes on your phone. Set that up now, because that's going to be crucial information. While the pace here is sort of slower and more deeper than the other courses, as I mentioned, it's also going to become fairly heady at various points. You're going to get pretty excited by some of the stuff that you're delving into and thinking about and ideas that you're coming up with. And as we all know, those things can disappear very quickly. And capturing them on the go is really important. I think Leah later will talk to you about that sort of her practice of capturing and recording and then being able to access previous ideas in sort of tree diagrams and various other ways. All of these ideas are really valuable, but they lose their value if they disappear. And then, of course, once we get to that point, your reflection on your practice is, well, where am I now and where am I going? And that helps to define the next few courses that you move through, culminating in your final research project. Leah, I might open it to a couple of questions.
Can I just share one thing? If I can. Oh man, here. This so edited in the hearing aid company for 37 weeks. Does anyone use Scrivener? So I've just finished a PhD and Scrivener is amazing. So Scrivener is a way that you can see all of your writing. If you see on the left-hand side there, it's free. But I have a diary, and so every single week when I had thoughts or design processes, I just had this diary. And then when I was writing my PhD, it was a really easy thing to go back to, because then I was like, okay, in week 5, I was thinking about this. Week 1, I was working on this kind of idea. And here are my sketches at the time. Here are the things that I was dealing with and the complexities. And it ended up being a really useful process. But it's also how I structured my PhD, because you can see all the chapters and then the others. So yes, I agree. I think the thing, that was a really great overview of the whole semester, but just making sure that you understand that for the first 4 weeks, it's really found that setting up an understanding of who we're working with, and then we'll move into the co-design engagement or strategy in the central section. Yeah. I'm happy to take questions. Does anyone have a question? Yeah, Susan?
I'm curious about the extent to which you are able to work with the end users of these products, and the extent to which, you know, for a variety of reasons, you might rely on people who are, you know, intermediaries or advocates.
Is that to me?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So in terms of the product work, I worked a lot with users of hearing aids, and I worked in aged care, did a lot of sort of focus groups in aged care, and particularly the experience of people using technologies. When it comes to the experience work that Marius and I are doing, we tend to not have, we tend to have patient representatives in the meetings, in the workshops, and that's really to do with our ethics framework. And I'm sure you'll understand this, that when you're in private practice, I mean, everything we do has to go through the ethics framework, but particularly when we're working with high-risk populations, we find that it's easier and less upsetting for the whole arrangement if we work with advocates and patient reps. Yeah, but all the technology stuff, working with people who need technologies, to a more or lesser extent, it depends on the project.
Okay, thanks.
Anyone else have a question?
I might just follow that one, Leah. As with the other courses, we will give you ethics forms to complete. So if you're talking to anyone during the progress of this course, you'll need to get them to sign a permission form, but we'll talk about that in more detail later. It's quite straightforward. It's all been covered. All you need to do is record it.
Marius, there's a few questions about Sona. Have we put those? Where have we put those?
I will stick them on Slack. I think it's better than and on Canvas. So I'll set that up tomorrow or later today.
Yeah. Yeah, I think maybe we'll put them tonight and then we can.
I've got another question. I've been obsessing about it since you spoke about your office and picking the tidiest corner of it. Can you show us the messiest corner of it?
Please don't ask.
No, it's a bike shed over there.
Come into our office and RMIT, you'll see.
So I think we'll finish there, Marius. Do you have any closing comments?
No, that's good. We will populate both Slack and Canvas, and should get off and running. I think picking your pace is going to be important. Starting to get some ideas, work out roughly what you're aiming to do at this point is really good. And then we'll check in again.
Yeah. I might say something in closing, and it's really about that the framework that we give you is really just a structure around the learning and where you want to go. If you've got something very specific that you'd like to work on, then always come to us and have a conversation and say, like, so we're working in this maternal and child health space, but it can be about all sorts of different things depending on what your interests are and where you're wanting to push your practice. So yeah, always come to us for a conversation. We're open for ideas and to help you go where you want to go. Okay, and it's really nice to meet you, and I look forward to hearing more from you next week.
Yeah, thank you, Leah. That was a really good introduction. Thanks, Marius.
Cool.
Thanks. What's your name?
My name's
PHN, the collaboration?
Yes, all right. So Primary Health Network is a part of a very large network system across Australia. And it's a pretty interesting construction, really, because on the ground, all of the health services are provided by either private service providers, dentists, doctors, GPs, etc., or they're provided by state government providers. And that might be mental health, alcohol and drugs, a whole range of other things. And what they've found, of course, as you probably assume, is that all of these services are very disconnected. So a person going through a situation, a crisis or whatever, tends to hit all of these different health services. None of them are connected, or very few are connected. So they're telling their same story constantly. They're getting different advice, and they're left in this sort of state of limbo because they don't really know what's coming next. They're being, as we heard today, they're being referred constantly to a different service. So one service will say you need to go to housing, or you need to go to mental well-being, or you need to go to alcohol. Each of these services don't understand that that person is coming, so they don't have what they call transition. There's no sort of recognition that that person is moving through these services. The other fascinating thing about Primary Health Network is that they are a federal government, so the state and private are at the bottom, but the federal government sitting over the top. And in our partnership arrangement with Primary Health Network, PHN, we took on two projects really. One was to try and understand the relationship of their network to the providers and how that might become more effective, simply by making it more efficient, making it more human, and finding ways to pull out some of the gaps that are already in there. And the second was, as a way of achieving that, was to go in and look at one situation rather than all of the various situations that they cover, and find some imaginative solutions or ideas. I shouldn't say solutions because we're not really looking for answers. What we're looking for is ideas on how they might themselves be able to generate new services or new ways of doing the service that they're doing. And particularly, I think, certainly coming from today, which is something I think Leah will talk about, weaving the services together. So erasing some of the barriers between the services, moving people in a more seamless way between them, given, of course, that most people in crisis situations have more than one need. They might have a health need, but they also have an economic need, maybe a transport need, maybe a housing need. So weaving those things together And then hopefully by the end of the course, we'll also be able to say, okay, well, how is it that we enable the people who are suffering from the crisis to push through this set of services and gain the best experience and outcomes for themselves. So not only is it providing great services and having them there when that person needs them, but it's giving that person the opportunity to really become the controller of their experience through that. How's that, Leah? You ready?